My name is Micael Castanheira, and I coordinate the Solvay Public Policy House at my faculty at the University of Brussels. And before we get started talking about Ukraine itself, I would like to refer to an article that was published in 2011. The article was authored by Ted Miguel and Gérard Roland, and it was titled The Long-Run Impact of Bombing Vietnam. So what Micael and Roland wanted to understand what was the effect of a war after a few decades, after 35 years, okay? 35 years at the end of combat, what can you see on the ground about the consequences of such bombing? They collected an insane amount of data on what was then, and I quote, the most intense bombing campaign in military history, worse than World War II. To cite them, for instance, the Quang Tri province was basically bombed flat during the war, with most of its capital infrastructure entirely destroyed. So this sadly reminds us of events that are happening now in Ukraine. And we must look forward, okay? This is the purpose of this conference today. And what is the long-term effect of such bombing? So they looked at the super precise local level of poverty rates, consumption levels, infrastructure, literacy, population density, and so on. And they can connect that to the amount of bombs dropped on each particular commune or place. And guess what they found? They found nothing. There was nothing to be seen. A generation and a half later, the effects of bombing can be corrected with proper rebuilding. So the Vietnam story gives us hope that provided we set the goals sufficiently high, Ukraine can rebuild and clear up the most visible stains of war and horror within a generation. But, and there is a big but, there is also a long series of scientific articles that demonstrate that even slight institutional accidents that weaken your institutions can completely damage your capacity to grow and to develop. And if you are not aware of that literature, I invite you to read the books by Daron Acemoglu and James Robinson, just as a starter, even if they are slightly thick. But there is really ample evidence of such effects. Sometimes I'm shocked to see that events that happened in the late Middle Ages still have an impact today at the provincial level in our countries. So this is exactly to get this balance right that the book has been written. And we need to thank the authors for bringing all these knowledge together and making it concrete about what we need to do for Ukraine today and in the coming years. The objective is to share these implications, to get the preconditions right, and then organize the delivery of physical capital. Beyond Ukraine, even if you're not interested, you're here today because you're interested in Ukraine, but even if you were not interested in Ukraine, just the ecological transition, the greening, will be the same kind of challenge. We need to get the institutions right, no corruption, no diversion of money, etc., to get a very effective impact of whatever we will be rebuilding. So the lessons are of utmost importance for Ukraine, but beyond Ukraine, for the world. So I want to thank CEPR for starting this initiative. And if you read the long list of books that have been published recently, you will see that this is just one initiative among many. This is a huge work that you are doing. Thank you for all that. I want to thank Georgetown University and the Global Economic Challenges Network for allowing us to exchange on such topics at a global level. And I want, of course, to thank my university, which is sponsoring the Solvay Public Policy House initiative. Without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Yuriy Gorodnichenko, who is one of the editors of the book, Rebuilding Ukraine. And he's also the Quentledge Presidential Professor at the Department of Economics, University of California, Berkeley. He graduated from the ERC Academy in Kiev and got his PhD from the University of Michigan. Yuriy serves also on many editorial boards, including Vox Ukraine. So Yuriy, could you give us an overview of the book's most salient points, please?
Thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much for organizing this event. It's a great pleasure to be here in Brussels, kind of the heart of Europe, and where many important decisions are being made. Now, this book has a little bit of history. The first set of ideas we had about the reconstruction of Ukraine was done in March of 2022. And at that point, it was not clear that Ukraine will be there, what is going to be left from the country. So in a way, it was kind of science fiction. We wanted to say, you know, if the war is over, how we build Ukraine. Now we have a lot more information. Ukraine is a candidate country. We have a lot of support. It's very clear Ukraine is going to be there. And there is a trajectory for Ukraine to become a very successful country. And so for us, the question is, how do we deliver that objective? The book is organized. How do I click?
The clicker does not work.
All right. Yeah, so the book has 14 chapters written by prominent scholars and experts. The plan for us was to have for each chapter a team of authors, somebody from Ukraine, somebody from Europe, and kind of at that stage already start negotiating, you know, how Ukraine is going to look like and how Ukraine is going to integrate into the European Union. These chapters can be grouped into roughly 4 buckets. One is hardware. What do we do with energy infrastructure, with transport infrastructure, with all sorts of things which are, you know, very physical, obviously. The second one is software. What do we do with institutions? What should be the rules of the game, so to say? Then obviously people are going to be the central component of the reconstruction. So we have to talk about science, education, healthcare, and the business sector is really the glue that is going to connect all these different pieces and make it all work. Now, I don't have time for summarizing the principles where we discussed them elsewhere. So instead, in the interest of time, I will. Yeah, it's a very long book, 450 pages. In the interest of time, I'll focus on my takeaways. First, obviously, you have to minimize the damage during the war, right? So if we can mitigate, you know, destruction of energy infrastructure, obviously, we're going to do a lot less work going forward. But it's not just physical infrastructure. Think about education. We have basically now a generation of children. We had 2 years of COVID. Now we have 1 year of war. We can help them, for example, by building bomb shelters to make sure that they can have, you know, proper education, and we're not going to have a lost generation. The second main takeaway from this book is that we already see that a lot of aid and support flows into Ukraine, and we can learn from this experience to form policies about the future support of Ukraine. And, you know, one lesson we see is that, you know, commitments to support Ukraine, economic, financial, right, really, you know, very generous, but the delivery sometimes is subpar, right? So we see big delays in disbursements of money to Ukraine. And it's not just, you know, financial aid. We see this in many other arenas. And so one lesson we learned from this is that, you know, this is such a singular event that we don't have established policies, institutions, and so on to address this kind of crisis. We need new institutions and new instruments. It's also very clear that the cost of reconstruction is going to be astronomical. You know, €1 trillion is not an unreasonable magnitude. It's very clear that public money is not going to be enough to pay for all of this. And so a massive FDI inflow into Ukraine is going to be absolutely critical to make it all work. And it's not just about, you know, money. It's also about bringing technologies to Ukraine, know-how, human capital, integration of Ukraine into global value chains. You know, some of this is going to happen naturally just because the prospect of the EU is a very powerful magnet for businesses. But some sense can be and should be done by policymakers. For example, there is a serious security concern about the future of Ukraine. And even if Ukraine wins this war, Russia is not going to disappear for a while. I shouldn't say that. You know, we're not sure about the future of Russia. But what is clear is that these residual concerns about security are going to be there. And so we have to think about ways to diversify these risks, to de-risk the business, military insurance, access to external finance, public-private partnerships. You know, these are all different forms to reduce kind of tail risks that private businesses are going to face in the post-war Ukraine. The hard truth is that not everything has to be rebuilt in Ukraine. We have lots and lots of places, lots and lots of businesses that are not going to be competitive after the war. But, some businesses will need to have serious investment to become relevant and important for the reconstruction of Ukraine. My favorite example is this map, which is showing you the railroad network in Ukraine. It's not kind of obvious from this, but if you extend the map and include Russia, you will see that this network is Moscow-centric, which makes sense, if Ukraine is a part of the Russian Empire or the Soviet Empire. But if Ukraine is a separate country focused on its trade with the European Union, the track should go east-west, not north-south. That's number one. Number two, if we all know that, ports may be mined or blockaded in other ways, we have to find other logistical routes to transport goods and people from Ukraine to the European Union. And so changing the gauge of tracks is going to be an economic objective, and also is a security objective, because Russia is now using Ukrainian railroads to transport its troops and weapons. Now, the cost is huge, anywhere between $40 billion and $130 billion. But this is going to be spread over 10 years, and it's a very worthwhile investment. We also learned a lot from institutional transitions we saw in post-communist countries, right? And so one lesson, at least I got from my colleague, Yuriy Roland, and from reading books by many people in this room, that you have to front-load institutional reforms. You have to make changes when you have a window of opportunity. And this means that we should start changing institutions now while the war is still going on. And this means changes in the judicial branch, in the civil service. We have to have stronger anti-corruption policies. More concretely, this also means that you have to reduce the economic power of oligarchs. You have to create more competition. Okay, you have to have a strong antitrust agency. You should also create more centers of political influence. You have to have political decentralization. Not everything has to be decided in Kiev. And obviously, as much as possible, you should align the regulation and legal framework in Ukraine with the EU's. Another thing I want to emphasize is that we see during the war a massive flow of people. People are moving from Eastern Ukraine to Central Ukraine to Western Ukraine. This trend has been already there before the war, because the center of economic gravity has been shifting towards the European Union, to the West. And this war accelerated these trends. So it's telling us that this is where the economic activity is going. And it's not just people, it's also going to be capital and other resources. We have to think how we can facilitate this process, not create barriers for it. And this in practice means you have to, for example, liberalize the economic environment, okay? Try to allow resources to flow as freely as possible. It's not just a geographical relocation, it's also relocation across sectors. Some people will not be able to find jobs in sectors where they were employed before. They have to be retrained. You have lots of veterans. They have to be reintegrated into the labor force. We'll also see shortages of labor immediately after the end of the war, because so many people are outside the country. We have to utilize these resources as effectively as possible. For example, if somebody is marginally attached to labor force, we have to integrate these people into labor force. They have to work. And this means more women labor force participation, youth participation, remote work, and so on. Now, a sustainable growth is going to require knowledge-based economy, which means you have to invest in R&D, in science and education. And Ukraine had initially relatively good conditions in this arena, but over years, there was a lot of disinvestment. We have to reverse this trend. And it's significant amounts of money, but it's something that is not often discussed in Brussels and in other capitals. People don't think that investment in human capital is number one priority, but it is. The final thing I want to mention is that we often portray the reconstruction of Ukraine as a one-way street, money flowing from somewhere into Ukraine. And so some people think it's an act of charity or something like this. And obviously, it's an important component. We help somebody who is in a very difficult need. But on the other hand, it's an opportunity for the European Union as well. It's really a win-win situation. For example, Ukraine is a major player in agricultural markets. It can easily double or triple production just because the level of productivity in Ukrainian agriculture is still very, very low. And so all these concerns about food security in Europe and elsewhere may be addressed with Ukraine. IT sector. Okay, so this is a rapidly growing sector in Ukraine. Even during the war, the growth rate was in double digits. So imagine you don't have internet, you don't have electricity, and these guys still manage to produce a lot of stuff and sell it abroad. Now, why is this important? Well, it's important because the European Union has been struggling for so many years to develop its own version of Silicon Valley, kind of Wild West. Now, it doesn't have to be Wild West, it may be Wild East. Maybe in Ukraine, we can have this ecosystem that is going to fuel dynamism in the EU economy. You can think about other options like friendshoring. Ukraine is very close, unlike China, to the European Union. It's going to offer cheap labor, educated labor force, geographical proximity. It's very hard to beat this combination of factors. Low carbon energy, another source of win-win kind of benefits. Now, to conclude, you see the images of Ukrainian cities and you wonder if they ever going to recover. And this is obviously a huge tragedy. But frankly, we have seen these pictures before. It's not just Vietnam. You can go to Cologne, Köln, and it was total destruction after World War II. The city center was in complete ruins. There was barely any, building livable at the time. This is how Köln looks now, a very dynamic, very vibrant city, lots of businesses, lots of people. So if we can do this in Köln, we can do this in any other place in Ukraine. Now, to conclude, I know this is a long book, 450 pages, but if you read one chapter every evening just before you go to bed, you should be done in about 3 weeks. It's easy read, and I encourage you to read this book. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Yuriy. Now joining us online is Tymofiy Mylovanov. Are you there, Tymofiy?
Hello.
Excellent. So, Tymofiy, thank you so much for joining us. I know that you are just back to Kiev from a long US tour. Your schedule is more than busy. Beyond doing all this work for rebuilding Ukraine, Tymofiy is the president of the Kiev School of Economics. He's an associate professor at the University of Pittsburgh. Before that, he was Ukraine's Minister of Economic Development, Trade and Agriculture. He graduated from the Kiev Polytechnic Institute and the Kiev Mohila Academy. And he obtained his PhD from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And jointly with you, I think he's one of the founders of the Vox Ukraine platform. So Tymofiy, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Ukrainians value freedom, and they're demonstrating it every day. And I think to rebuild Ukraine after the war, we need to ensure that this feeling of Ukrainian being free remains with them. For Ukrainians, I think it would mean prospects of the future, prosperous economy, liberal democracy, and a part of the EU. And what this war is doing now, it's taking away that freedom to choose the future. And it's taking it away also through the brain drain of human capital. The book that we're discussing today talks about a lot of issues, but I want to focus on one seemingly overlooked issue. We do not want to end up with Ukraine, which is victorious, but doesn't have human capital. So in that sense, it's critically important right now to maintain human capital in Ukraine, to develop human capital, and ensure that there is human capital in Ukraine that will be able to develop and rebuild Ukraine after the war. Everything that Yuriy has been talking about, including governance, anti-corruption initiatives, proper institutional development, competitive environments, removing of oligarchs, all of that requires smart and committed people. But smart and committed people is not enough if they are not trained, if they don't have professional skills, and if they don't have education. And currently, Ukraine has had 2 years out of schools of the entire population because of COVID. And now it's a second academic year. People are not in schools again. Plus, there are millions of people, and some of them are very well-educated people who have left the country. So this is an overlooked aspect. When we talk about recovery and reconstruction, in this book and elsewhere, we are focusing on capital and we're focusing on institutions. We're focusing about investments, we're focusing about specific industries, what needs to be done, how the residential housing has to be rebuilt, how the logistical chains have to be created, what are we going to do about industries which have been destroyed or not. But we are missing or we're not giving enough attention to the human capital. If we do not have people in Ukraine, it will be difficult to rebuild Ukraine. If we do not have educated people in Ukraine, professional people in Ukraine, or we do not create incentives for people to come back to Ukraine, then that will be an issue. So I want to emphasize that it's critically important, even during the war, to continue to rebuild right now, so that people have decent access to services, decent access to some quality of life, that they have incentives to continue to simply live their normal life. So the challenge for Ukraine is, in order to be successfully rebuilt after the war, Ukraine has to find a way to run a value-added economy during the war. Because without that, we will lose the talent. We're already losing it because a lot of talented people went to the defense effort, and many of them have already died. We also have lost a lot of people due to migration. And so the labor market in Ukraine currently, to maintain the resilience of the economy, which has been amazing, but the labor market is stressed. There's simply no people. And so what needs to be done is that institutions around the world have to establish horizontal partnerships with institutions in Ukraine. Companies should be matched with companies. So they start positioning and start helping themselves to create projects even during the war, so that once the war is over, the projects are implemented and people go back to Ukraine, or people who are in Ukraine can develop their talents. Now, in the book, I'm talking about I'm a co-author on 2 chapters. One is on governance, the other one on anti-corruption. I think anti-corruption argument is case in point. There is an outrage among the Ukrainian population, among the Ukrainian people against corruption, and it has changed over the last 8 years. In 2014, the outrage was caused by the lavishness or the luxury of the oligarchs and of then, Russian proxy president who fled, Yanukovych, who fled the country. Many of you might remember his exotic zoo and exotic palace and golden bread and all kinds of things, which simply, are not normal, probably are a sign of some psychotic disorder. And people in Ukraine were just upset about this. People felt it's so unfair that the country is not being developed while the top politicians are extremely corrupt and extremely rich. But in 2022, in 2023, the outrage against corruption or against poor governance has become instrumental. Now people understand that every $1,000 stolen or diverted is $1,000, which is not used for the defense effort. And so the price will be paid in lives. So Ukraine every day pays in lives for the right to exist. And now people understand that weak institutions, bad governance, corruption take away from that. At the same time, we have really disturbing patterns of anti-corruption in Ukraine over the last weeks. A lot of reformers who did critical reforms in 2014, 2020, or 2022 even, they have been given indictments. Some of them have been arrested, and some of them have even been sentenced on some of the, in my view, very, very bogus claims. So the system is non-professional enough. It's the comprehensive anti-corruption infrastructure is there. In the West, in the free world, we have read a lot about the recent preemptive cases against the Ministry of Defense procurement and also Ministry of Regional Development procurement. I think those are signs, good signs, positive signs of the system working, trying to preempt potential corruption. But at the same time, there are a lot of cases where the system is very indiscriminate and attacks people who have made right decisions, took risks, and now are being simply punished by vested interests. So the battle is against corruption and for good governance in Ukraine is very complex and multifaceted. And there is a chapter on this, and there's also a follow-up Vox EU piece on this, in which we talk about governance and corruption. And so, yeah, as Yuriy said, it's an easy reading and it's also exciting reading. One point I want to finish with that actually Russian President Vladimir Putin on February 21st in the last year 2021 justified the invasion 3 days before it happened in Ukraine by arguing that Ukraine is politically corrupt and its military is corrupt and Ukraine is a failed state. Ukraine has demonstrated it is not so, that Ukraine is not a failed state, military is not corrupt, but there is this additional threat of Ukraine not being, fully heads-on in tackling corruption that it also can be taken for right by the Russian propaganda. So governance and competence are critical issues for Ukraine. We want to have ethical people in the office, but we also don't want to have ethical idiots in the office. So we want to have ethical and competent people in the office. And we need to ensure that education is there, professional skills are there, and there is no brain drain. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tymofiy. I would add that diaspora is a big asset, and I trust that you will discover that plenty of refugees can train and get training across all of Europe. And I hope they will come back with better training, better international contacts, and that will speed up all the reconstructions. As a word for the people attending online, I want to remind you that in 2 presentations, we'll start taking questions, so don't hesitate to ask your questions online. Our third speaker today is Veronika Movchan. Veronika is a research director at the Institute for Economic Research and Policy Consulting in Kiev. She headed the Ukrainian team in the project Understanding the EU's Association Agreements that was implementing by the Center of European Policy Studies, I guess with Daniel, who is here. She has been a team leader on many international projects in Eastern Europe and beyond Eastern Europe itself, by the way. And she's a member of the Vox Ukraine editorial board. She graduated from the National University of Kiev Mohila Academy and was a visiting research fellow at Stanford. Let me share the Zoom screen with you so that you see where you're heading. And in principle, if you click, you can.
Yeah, thank you. It's my great pleasure to be here and talk about reconstruction, which is a huge, important topic. And it's, as we've already seen, it's really multifaceted and many things to be discussed. I will focus on the very specific issues of foreign trade and FDIs. Basically, Ukraine is a small open economy, small in terms of like world economy, although it's physically quite large. And Ukraine is very open economy with trade in goods and services is on the EU average. The country did a lot of reforms in trade and FDI sphere, but especially in trade. I would say that starting early 2000s, then first in the preparation of WTO accession, and then immediately after that in preparing to conclude the CFTA and association agreements, and especially after the Revolution of Dignity and the signature of association agreements, many reforms were done in such technical spheres as technical barriers to trade, sanitary, phytosanitary measures, customs, public procurement. Basically, Ukraine has been eager to integrate the global trade. We have about 19 FTAs with 47 countries that already covers about half of our trade. Also, was many laws adopted about privatization, new laws on concessions, strengthened state guarantees about investors' protection, strengthening intellectual rights protection. So basically, if you look at the Ukrainian legislation, it's quite developed. It's based on the EU, maybe not fully aligned, not fully identical, but major principles are already there. And there are institutions that aim to promote both trade and FDI. But Ukraine, until recently at least, failed to fix political fundamentals. I am talking about rule of law. I am talking about there's a derivative, the poor protection of property rights. And until recently, if you believe in indicators, still high corruption. We had a very fruitful discussion today in the morning in the European Commission. Actually, that my picture might be a bit too pessimistic, and a lot of fundamentals have already changed. But that is still like the process of movement, and we need to ensure that they're stable. So far, if we're looking at the changes, there have been a lot of critical changes in trade, major structural developments. In the book, you have a lot of pictures, charts. Here, I will just briefly outline them. Basically, there is a major geographic orientation. Now, EU is 55% of Ukraine's trade. Just before the war, it was 40%. Most likely, Ukraine will not penetrate much further into EU in terms of the share, because a lot of what it produces is actually for outside the world. But Ukraine is using the recognition of standards that we are using the same standards as EU does as a selling point to further outside Europe. In exports, the major changes, agro-food exports, indeed, we have more potential to grow. Although before the war, we almost achieved the yields compared to Polish ones. So we are dependent on technologies to expand further. And there was a decline in metals and products thereof. What is also happened is a decline in machine building, which is like losing some of the edge in high technologies. But we have been a boom of IT service experts, very large, continuing to grow during the war, and also business services. It is one of the best that Ukraine expects to continue even after the war, because it's one of the sectors that has less security exposure compared to, for example, metallurgy. In imports, until 2022 was a clear decline in the import dependence for energy products, with going alongside with energy savings and some industrial restructuring. It changed a bit during the war because our production facilities were demolished and we had to import more than we did before. But likely the trend will continue after we win. And also we see a growing imports of machinery, which is normal investments. But major changes in infrastructure happened in 2022 because of refugees. It was a boom in travel imports. And as a result, for the first time ever, a deficit in trade of services. However, while the trade is like dynamics, integration is actually quite diversified, we don't see the equally same development in FDIs. And basically the explanation is, at least partly, is these political fundamentals, the property rights, because it's not only FDIs are not coming, it's also, if you look at the share of fixed capital accumulation to GDP, before the war it was 12%. Now it's even less because the fixed capital accumulation dropped by half in the war time. So basically, Ukraine is hugely underfinanced, it's hugely underinvested, and that has to be changed. And this is a huge question how to do that. the full-scale war resulted in major changes. We have discussed them, but also it opened new opportunities, starting with a tectonic shift of the candidate status that I think it's one of the major changes because it gave a clear goal understood by the whole society where the country goes. And it can create a positive pressure, although it can be also lost opportunity if we do not manage it right. But also it creates, we have also a lot of technical things embedded in association agreement and still much more to come. But what we already have is joining EU electricity market, the common transit system, free roaming is promised. We have temporary elimination of all TRQs and the rest, and the agreement, for example, on drones. So there is opportunities that creating a chance for Ukraine to integrate in the EU and the globe already now. And what is more important, that it is the thing that will be needed to the reconstruction and recovery, because exports is the source of accelerated growth. And the FDIs is the source of capital, which is, it has been badly needed before, and it is even in more need now with such a huge losses of like physical assets, and also with huge losses of the labor. I fully agree with Tymofiy that the labor issue is one of the most important, or the most important in the reconstruction, but I'm not sure that we really be able to bring people back. So more capital intensive, technologically intensive development is definitely will be needed for the country. That needs private property protection. And that is why the fundamental reforms remain on the agenda and will be remain like the core element of all other discussions. Definitely we'll need export-oriented trade policy, integration in the EU and not only EU value chains, diversified expertise list like exposed components like IT, and we'll definitely see much more new niches emerging related to the war. For example, we have, it's not only about weapons, it's about, for example, medical products that have been emerging now because they're in a major demand, and that can be sold around after the war. Deepening integration with the EU was, we have a great idea of stage accession, as so Michael Emerson offered it already some time ago, because it's important to ensure that we are not in a Balkan trap and that we continuously progress in integration with the EU market before the membership, before the accession, because this last step is quite difficult now. Also, not only because of Ukraine, also because of the readiness of the European Union. And Ukraine will continue opening other markets. We're already negotiating further FTAs because it's the way to go forward. Basically, if we are talking about trade and investment, it's clear that we need private partnerships, we need private money to develop. What is the role of international donors? It's a final slide to say that international donors, we expect technical financial assistance, insurance. We need to cover non-economic risks for investors, for producers, for traders. Business development programs, also EU-funded, export promotion agencies supporting, for example, export trading agencies. It's not so cheap, but it's not so huge, and it will help to increase absorption capacity and rebuild the country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Veronika. Now, finally, we have the last presentation by Alexander Pivovarsky. Alexander is a director at the EBRD, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. So that's the right place to be today, I guess, where he helps develop and expand the bank's financial market development efforts and develop the capital product offering. Prior to joining the bank, Alexander worked at the IMF. He was negotiating stabilization programs. He led policy advisory programs at Harvard University, where he graduated from, as well as from Taras Shevchenko National University of Kiev. As far as I see, you're not one of the editors of Vox Ukraine. So, Alex, you will be presenting the...
I contributed to the launch of it. It launched the event we organized. Unfortunately, a big event after
my database is not
after the war. Started the first war in Ukraine in 2014, and the economists there convened this Vox Ukraine. But thank you so much for inviting me to join today. I'm not going to use a presentation, but I do have a few points I wanted to make. So my colleague Ralph De Haas, who is a proper financial economist, and I, who have worked a bit more in I would say on the policy side in recent years, we contributed the chapter, and we have kind of several messages in our chapter. So, generally, we argue that mobilizing financial savings, local and foreign, will be critical for recovery. We believe strongly that private sector, and it's, I think, echoed in other chapters, that private sector would need to be playing a critical role in the development of the economy after the war. And so we believe that the key challenge in this regard will be speed, so the quick recovery, scale, so being able to attract significant scale of financial flows, and also different types of instruments, and without compromising stability, because unfortunately Ukraine has gone through several bouts of instability now in the financial sector, which already in the 90s, but also in 2008 and now again 2014. So, and again, in a way, this crisis actually, surprisingly, Ukrainian financial system showed quite a lot of resilience, but it's not completely surprising. So I'm going to say maybe a few words about the financial sector in Ukraine before the war. So it was not very big. It actually had the overall sector was around 60% of GDP, but only about half of it is private sector lending, and the other half is more like public lending to the state, and half of the sector's assets are in the state hands. After 2014 reforms, a number of banks were closed, some were nationalized, including the largest bank. And there were previous, unfortunate nationalization after the previous crisis, 2008. And the non-financial sector is even smaller. So basically very small. And so connected lending was a big problem before 2014. However, and at that time, after the first war, NPLs increased to over 50% of all private sector assets, which is enormous by international standards. And the central bank engaged in a significant cleaning up of the financial system and actually achieved quite impressive results. And as a result, the system today is so much more resilient. And the authorities also introduced new approaches to NPL resolution, so-called Kiev approach, which attempts to simplify the out-of-court settlements or out-of-court arbitration around NPLs. So as I mentioned already, the capital markets were very small. And it was for a number of reasons. So both the lack of institutional setup, so legal and regulatory environment, lack of local investor base, which was just beginning to emerge before the war, limited and fractured capital market infrastructure. There were 4 exchanges, but almost no listings, very little liquidity. And in fixed income, there was some liquidity. And in fact, through connection to Western markets, through Clearstream, there was actually increase in liquidity. But the main, in a way, positive was macroeconomic environment. Actually, it was improving, partly again, due to the efforts of the central bank. Ukraine was moving towards modern practices to inflation targeting, and actually it was creating a preconditions for capital markets development. So as I said already, the 2014 reforms and initial actions of NBU helped to stabilize the financial sector very quickly as the war started. So many people, many observers, also foreign observers, expected much more financial instability, huge devaluation, runs on banks. None of this happened. There were a couple of smaller banks were closed, but generally the system weathered really well so far the crisis. And however, private sector lending more or less stopped, and capital markets were disrupted, and also the exchange rate had to be refixed. So it also led, combined with various policies, it led to kind of freezing of the financial market in general. So it's sort of now on a back burner. And so for looking forward, I'm going to focus on 5 priorities, and we could discuss maybe in the conversation on in more detail those priorities. So the first priority would be to get back on track the financial sector. And there's already preparation ongoing for asset quality review, including discussion with IMF, EBRD, other institutions who will help the government to conduct it. It will be important to focus on NPL resolution, because the NPLs will inevitably increase, some of them due to destruction that was experienced because of the war. And there's a risk that the sector will be bogged down in the resolution of NPLs for a very long time. So there is a need this time to consider possibly a so-called centralized solution for the NPLs. There will be a need to recapitalize banks, and there will be challenges in that area as well. The government already owns half of the sector. So how do you ensure that the banks are both recapitalized, but they're not all state-owned at the end of the process, that foreign banks remain, in fact, maybe even increase because of the EU integration prospects. So big challenge there. We believe that there should be fewer state banks at the end of the post-war, and those that are in state hands that need to be more commercially run. That is a big challenge for the future. More market-based finance and focus on equity tools. So the many companies will have lost equity. So war, first of all, destroys equity, because equity is usually at the end of the line in a way, when there are any shocks. And so there will be a need to come up with instruments, possibly even new innovative instruments. And there will be a need to consider, as Veronika already mentioned, setting up mechanisms for de-risking of non-commercial risk. So let's call it war insurance, and offer it at some scale, so that both to facilitate trade, but also the future investments. There will be a need to continue integration into the European financial market. The government actually started this process before the war already. There were mechanisms under association agreement, but also kind of a common mechanisms related to regulatory alignment that were being already under implementation or consideration. So the government was actually following already kind of EU integration without yet being a candidate country, but there will be a need to accelerate this process. The government is now focusing on some innovative tools like in digital finance, and EU is for the first time introducing regulatory decisions in that area. So Ukraine probably could jump forward and just instead of having any intermediate solutions, focus on EU new emerging EU solutions. And finally, fostering financial inclusion. It's in the past, there was this feeling, I think, in society, in various surveys, that somehow the financial sector benefits few people. And many people lost in the previous, in privatizations and various financial sector, restructuring. So it's really critical that any solutions in the future, that they support SMEs, people who were displaced, people who lost during the war, and that new tools are offered that are not necessarily transfers, but types of hybrid tools that would allow make sure that the broader strata of society can benefit from financial access. So I think I'm going to stop here. There are quite a lot of detail we could discuss in terms of what it means, what type of instruments could be launched. I could also say we are working with the government, with central bank on launching some of these ideas, like war insurance, alignment, AQR, and I hope that this will not stop. That this will continue with including as a part of the European integration process. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So you're actually offering me a perfect bridge for the first questions I had collected just before we started the conference. Olivier Debond from the European Investment Bank was remarking to me on a brief call that the book was issued in December. We are now 3 months later, and the situation is moving so fast that actually some things are already outdated. You were pointing at some hints of what is moving these days. The last 2 days, you have been touring capitals in Europe. Today, you had lots of contacts also in Brussels. And so what is new? Where are we heading today? What are you seeing simmering and moving? Maybe Yuriy wants to start?
Yes, very briefly, I should say, by academic standards, this book was written very, very, very fast. And in part, it was because we wanted to stay relevant. This book was incepted, sometime in mid-July. We wanted to have first chapters in early September. And again, it's impossible in Europe to write a book in these conditions because everybody has a vacation in August. But anyways, people did this. Now, it's true we have to think about this document as a living document. It's continuously should be updated and we should work and so on. We have positive developments. For example, we know there is a G7 platform where presumably ministers of finance from G7 are going to meet and discuss how you should support Ukraine. It's a good development, and it's consistent with our recommendations that there should be a permanent body where various donor countries are talking to each other. So it's a plus. On a more negative side, it's not really clear what kind of resources are going to be behind this platform. I learned today that the secretariat that is going to support this platform is going to have 10 people, no more. And it's grossly inadequate because if you think about reconstruction of a big country, we should be thinking in terms of thousands. Just as a point of reference, Marshall Plan had 4,000 Americans working on this in Europe, right?
The Treuhand?
Say again?
Do you know the Treuhandanstalt? How many people they had?
4,000. Marshall Plan.
No, but the German transition agency.
Just 10. So I think it's important to have these debates. We should learn from politicians what they can deliver, but we should keep in mind our objectives clear, what we want to have in the end. Do we want to have a meeting place, or do we want to have a place where actual resources are going to be allocated, decided, and who is going to coordinate all of that? So I'll stop here.
Well, I would say so. We approached our chapter in a way where we wanted to put their actionable things that could eventually expire, but maybe not immediately, would take some time to implement, and also engage in parallel in dialogue with the central bank. So it actually, from what we understand, this is still very relevant, and some of the things, unfortunately, will take time. So, asset quality review will likely be launched only as we approach the war end. War insurance will take a while to develop and actually scale up even longer. So I don't believe it is irrelevant, but seeing some things happening already in line with some of our recommendations is a good thing, because we feel like we actually, this project mobilized a lot of conversations, created a lot of debates that led to kind of alignment of thinking with the action on the policy side.
I can add that I agree there it's nothing that is like expired. There are some developments, for example, the Minister of Economy of Ukraine and the World Bank MIGA have been agreed on the insurance. It's much smaller than we would like to, but at least it's a piloting, and hopefully it will be extended. There are some further progress in implementation of association agreement, and now with this accession process being like the second track, there is a new impetus for sectoral integration. We see some hopefully promising issues in technical barriers to trade, these talks on agreement on conformity assessment and acceptance of industrial products and mutual recognition, basically, is hopefully starting this year and concluding soon. There are developments in transport, in digital sphere. So the process isn't going. We cannot say that something changed so much to be changed in the book. We can only add up something new developments in line with expected trends.
Thank you. Tymofiy, I see already 4 people at least asking questions here. Do you want to step in now or wait for the next questions?
I can wait. Yeah.
Very good. So Daniel Goro had a question. You are known for chairing CEPS, but now you're moving to the Institute for European Policymaking created by Berkeley University.
Yes, and as of today, I have moved, in my mind at least. Yeah, very many thanks for presenting this impressive work. You at the outset, you emphasized the importance of institutions. But then we didn't have so much material about institutions, and I realized that it's much more difficult to measure progress. One can basically only speculate. I'm more concerned with a macroeconomic development, which is relatively easy to foresee, and which then may have an impact on the institutions as well. And that's the post-war reconstruction period. Is likely to see an economy with huge transfers from abroad, probably continuing remittances, which already were before 10% of GDP. You want to have more FDI, and then all the foreign official assistance. So you'll have a huge Dutch disease effect. How can you expect under these circumstances an export-orientated industry to rise? Because there isn't one. Sorry if I'm being very rough. If you look at the pre-war export structure, you see mainly agriculture and semi-work metal products and similar other raw material, near raw material exports. Of course, all this stuff is very capital intensive, and that can maybe continue. But if you have huge influx of foreign aid plus remittances, probably you get wages which are way above the wages at which industrial workers in Ukraine would be competitive. And that, I think, is a central issue for all reconstruction, which I would like to see to discuss a bit more.
Thank you very much. That's indeed a very important question. Tymofiy, precisely, you were mentioning the Silicon Valley of Europe, the Wild East. So maybe you want to start answering?
Thank you. I think Yuriy was mentioning the Wild East, West, and future, but thank you very much. I am maybe overly optimistic about the future of Ukraine post-war, and I'm less concerned about the issue of the wages. My understanding is that the high-tech or creative industries continue to grow even during the war. They're also in the military tech and the defense sector major advances in AI, cyber security, in unmanned aerial and non-aerial vehicles, in robotics. There's also a lot of advancements caused by the contamination of mines. So there's a lot of autonomous advancement, particularly in agriculture, in the mining. So that's just those things which I see physically, that there are startups and there are new companies and there are investments happening in those companies. They, of course, are small on the macro scale, but post-war, and I also think it's not correct to say post-war because the risks will stay. There could be different scenarios, but unless there's Russia doesn't exist anymore, and I don't think that's a likely scenario, the threat from Russia will continue to be. So Ukraine will continue to spend quite a bit of funding on defense. And so defense sector and defense production is going to be a major production industry. And I think there are opportunities to transform or maybe spill over those innovations which have happened over the last years, not just the last year, both in cyber and in high tech and military to some dual use, but as well as IT. Those are the industries which are likely to grow. I agree with you on agriculture, and I agree with you on metallurgy, but agriculture is high tech really. It's very, very digital in Ukraine. So in that sense, I think salaries there already sufficiently higher than the average in Ukraine. So I don't think that that argument will. I do worry about demographics overall, but I also think the EU accession will be the natural anchor, the natural gravity to increase trade with the EU, and this will be the driving force. So in that sense, in my view, okay, I talked about the labor market and human capital. I think that's the issue, well-trained human capital. And the second issue is business climate and judicial environment, and maybe with political environment, as Veronika has mentioned, to ensure that investments can be channeled, or money, or even just remittances could be channeled into investments and to productive development of the Ukrainian economy, as opposed to like just social transfers to maintain consumption. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alex. You were mentioned, but I see also Mathias Ouatripon wanting to ask a question immediately. So I propose we take your question, Mathias, and then we'll take one or two questions from online, and then we'll go back to the room. Mathias Ouatripon is a professor at the Free University of Brussels.
Okay,
your question.
Well, thank you very much. It's very, very interesting, great book and so on. So congratulations. One question, I mean, maybe it's me, yeah, I haven't read it yet. So, but I haven't heard that much about political economics, except for corruption and things like that. I do think that, you know, I mean, what the Ukrainian people will have gone through is, of course, much more traumatic than what happened in the 80s until the fall of the Berlin Wall. And even there, the transition afterwards in Europe and Soviet Union wasn't a great success. And there was a lot of, you know, Washington consensus and all these kind of things. Frankly, I don't think we can afford that, you know. I think Ukraine is more like, you know, Belgium after World War I or World War I or World War II. And there what happened, basically, universal suffrage, okay, only for men in 1918, and then the welfare state. Here, I hear a lot about liberalization, asset quality review, these kind of things. Okay, we need that, but let's face it, you don't want to create too many losers. And I do think one question is, what are you doing to make sure we don't redo what we did in the 90s? You know, if anything, if I look at the successful transition from market to the economy at the time, from central planning to the economy, to market economy, that was China. China was doing better. Now, I think what we need I would say, to look at Europe, we would need, I think, the generosity of West Germany towards East Germany, of course, but without the crazy exchange rate policy. Yeah, with the wage policy. So you want the wage policy for, I mean, relative the same as in accession countries, but we want the generosity, financial generosity of West Germany to East Germany. And the question is, how do we do that? Would the Marshall Plan be a good idea? I think we are also talking about we are moving away, or we're moving towards industrial policy in Western Europe and Europe in general. So I think what happened with COVID was massive state support, income support and the like, plus massive industrial policy for COVID vaccines and the like. Should we think more about these kinds of things? Maybe you are doing it, but it sounded to me a bit much, you know, as I say, some Washington consensus type ideas.
Thank you very much. Excellent question. Yuriy, I understand you want to take the floor for that one.
Yes, thank you. I should say I'm not from Washington. I'm from Berkeley, California, which is as regulated as you can imagine in the United States. The political economy is obviously extremely important. We want to make sure that there are no policy reversals, there is no revisionism, revanchism, anything like this. We want to make sure that we don't have a majority of losers. And some lessons we already learned during the war. For example, you have lots and lots of refugees. You have to support them to make sure that those people are taken care of. And in some ways, Ukraine has developed new technologies to identify people who need support, and they can receive the support, targeted support, effectively. One particular element I want to emphasize in this dimension that everybody has to be on board. There has to be a social contract. I would say the biggest challenge here is going to be housing. We'll have lots and lots of people who lose their homes, and this creates enormous inequality in the society. And one of the things we emphasize in the book is urban development. How do you develop cities? How you build them quickly, cost effectively? How you can compensate people for war damages, war losses. You should have vouchers. People have some flexibility in deciding for themselves where they want to live, what they want to do with this money. And we can learn from the Belgian experience, and probably the next iteration of this book will have some historical comparisons. Also, I wanted to mention very briefly a few things in response to Daniel's question about the Dutch disease. It's true, it may be a big challenge, and Ukraine is not going to have enough absorptive capacity to take a lot of money without appreciation of the exchange rate. It's a serious concern, and many people in Ukraine are aware of this issue, and the central bank is thinking about the macroeconomic framework. CEPR is also thinking about designing a series of proposals how we deal with this. But we should keep in mind that when Ukraine is going to receive a lot of grants, huge capital inflows, it's also going to have huge purchases from the rest of the world. You will have to import electrical equipment, construction equipment, cranes, materials, cement, all of this stuff, because it's not going to be available in Ukraine in sufficient quantities. And so some of the things are going to be naturally offset.
I see that Tymofiy also raised his hand.
Yeah, happy for him to go first.
Yeah, thank you. I think this is the right question. It's exactly to the point. What is happening in Ukraine today? During the war, most of these economic initiatives that are implemented by the government and the way the government actually is thinking about post-war recovery are driven by political economy concerns. And we will have a large population of people coming from the war who already have expectations about the way the economy will be developed, and they will be shaping both the political landscape and the economic landscape. That's a challenge that everyone is very clear about right now, because veterans have already started coming back in huge numbers, and there are a lot of IDPs even within Ukraine. And so these people need social support. And their views, their votes matter. And at this point, I think there's no yet clear thinking or clear vision about how we're going to address it and how to connect or reconcile the ideas about the reconstruction with the ideas about the political economy and social support after the war. And also a sense of what people fairly could expect to be given. This might be the right moment to think about it and maybe offer alternative views about this. But it's, I can only say, I just want to emphasize that it's true that these issues have been thought about in a bit of isolation, and that's a problem at this moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Tymofiy.
So
I
if you
feel
don't
that
mind, I'm gonna
Matthias
come
will
back.
have to co-author a chapter for the next version of the book.
Yes.
Alex.
Well, is this view on political? Because I think that our view is that there should be a financial sector that can support development after the war, but it doesn't negate the need potentially to support, address social needs. For example, when the war started, one idea, many of us immediately started running with ideas for what would be needed, and there was a question about whether Ukrainians should get guaranteed minimum income. It could be not very big, but as a form of transfer, to help them. And so today there were discussions about how to incentivize Ukrainians going back. So, well, if they come back, they have no access to finance, no bank would lend to them, and there's still some other challenges like no housing and no income guaranteed at all. You are going to have a problem. It's I think the political economy challenge will be real. We don't disagree with that. We don't directly, as far as I know, we didn't go into the topic of political economy. We are offering kind of solutions to think about, knowing the kind of the context of Ukraine. But of course, it requires a kind of political perspective, and there are various views. Ukraine is ultimately a democracy, so there's kind of different competing perspectives. So there will likely be a kind of a hybrid of these proposals that will come back. But I would say you cannot, so some believe that we should write off the existing financial system, like let it destruct itself and go and create fintech solutions. And we don't believe in that. At least we believe the system needs to be able to support financial sector. We do see challenges with governance. So if you read Ukrainian news, there's a lot of tension now around governance, around the corruption institutions, their role and how they are flexing their muscle. But there are problems with governance of state enterprises, lingering problems. So having the whole financial sector be in state hands most likely is not going to lead to very good ultimate result in terms of effectiveness. And then in terms of inflation, which is trying to find the wages in Ukraine, but before the war, they were, I think, at about 15% of PPP adjusted average wage of the EU. So there's a kind of a very long way to go before, and since we're assuming total factor productivity to rise because of institutional reforms, very large investments, and so eventually it will become a problem. But other countries went through it, so there will be a need in macro framework designed, and possibly encouraging savings, and some of them including abroad, like ISAs and other solutions.
Thank you. Online with us is Francis Vella, a professor at Georgetown, who is collecting the online questions. You're telling me that there are quite a few you would like to share with us.
Yeah. So, can you hear me okay?
Absolutely well.
Okay, so we have a number of questions. So I'll read them out now, and then maybe the panelists, who I've got to say, this has really been a fascinating discussion, can take stock of the questions as I write them out, the general theme, and then they can answer them in turn. So I'll go ahead and do it that way. The first question we have is from Angela Preston, and she's asking, how much consideration has been given to include women in the reconstruction of Ukraine? For example, what percentage of women compared to men will be involved in the Reconstruction Committee? A second question from Glenn Williamson touches on a different topic. He's asking, what role is there for smaller regional initiatives to start more quickly and perhaps pilot new partnerships for rebuilding Ukraine? A third question from Maria Golubeva is asking, what is being done to improve the capacity of public administration to implement reforms and to ensure the efficient use of donor funding for recovery? Brianna Pirelli-Harris mentioned that how Timothy mentioned that the importance of human capital, but one of the main issues that has not been discussed is the low fertility and population decline, which has been a serious challenge for Ukraine for decades. And finally, Claudio Cologero is asking, I think, a question which is relevant. We're all thinking is that during World War II, talks about world partitions and reconstruction had started in 1944, but the difference was that at that point, the war's end was in sight. Do you think that we are in the same condition now?
That is a broad set of topics. Veronika, you were talking about partnerships and all the number of agreements that Ukraine was signing across the world. And we are also mentioning women, so I think you should give it a head start.
Just, okay, now it works. Yeah, about women, I will try to answer this. On the one hand, I have not heard about like some quotas for women and men in the reconstruction or any reconstruction bodies. If we look at the data in like general data, there is less women in politics than on average. So it's like, seems to be that women have some ceiling, but I'm not so sure in that. Because, for example, one of the Olga Stefanishyna as Vice Prime Minister on European integration is one of the top jobs now, and we don't have a lot of women in the government, but we have women just as active as they want. Maybe it's not fair, but we have legal things in elections, and we have some quotas for women, but I would say that in the business, it's a lot of women also. And there are women movements, and okay, Tymofiy will help. I would not say that it's the issue that we are paying attention. We just develop as we are. Sorry if it's a bit messy because I'm not very good in these topics. Basically, as of the partnerships, yeah, what I was talking about was more about free trade agreements that Ukraine had, and Ukraine is negotiating now. It's not exactly the agreements that will help in reconstruction directly. These are the agreements that are just helping the country to be more open and to rely on exports. Why I think that Ukraine will still be export-oriented is partly because of its production profile. We are not, many of what we produce, we just don't need at such scale domestically. But I really very grateful for Tymofiy for his answer, because I think that we have a lot of potential in high technology spheres developing now. And also we had this potential even before, but it's not as clearly seen because, yeah, we have several big chunks of raw materials that dominate and you see it. But if you go deeper into the structure of trade, we exported everything up to the planes and components for spaceships and engines. And they are not lost in the war. It's not on the occupied territories. There are many things that Ukraine can offer on the high-tech side. The issue, and a major issue for me, is a property rights, including intellectual property rights, a proper patent law, because we have so many things that we see that it's developed by Ukrainians, but it's patented and sold from other countries just because it's not a proper protection in the country. And that is one of the things that I hope will change, including because of this much more clear European path after and during the war. Okay.
Thank you very much, Veronika. I see Tymofiy wants to answer as well, but note that we have about 12 minutes left and I still have at least 3 questions in the room.
Right, I'll be quick. So the last question is important. Do we have a thing as like a victory in sight? And a lot of people perceive that's none because you see no dynamics. I disagree. I disagree strongly with this. What we have seen is that Ukrainian economy can survive the war and function during the war, and the Ukrainian military can stop the Russian military. This means the victory is within sight. We just need to finish the job. We should stop debating about, what will or will not cause escalation. Or what is the amount of military support, economic support that will be sufficient or when it should be done. We just need, we have these two ingredients in place. The country exists, it's not a failed state, it functions well, amazingly well during the war, and it can stop the Russian military. The problem is that every day there's some hesitation on the part of our friends and allies. We pay for that hesitation, for the existence in lives, in tens and hundreds, and sometimes even more of lives of Ukraine. So to answer the last question, yes, the victory is within the sight, but we just need to finish the job. For that, we need military support weapons. On the women issue, the first vice prime minister is a woman, in addition to the European vice prime minister, European vice prime minister for European integration. It is true that the numbers are not proportional, and we have a lot of work to do, but there's also a strong movement within women leadership within the political elites, but also within the business elites, which are pushing for that. So this is an issue, but this issue is being addressed, and I'll revert back. Thank you.
Thank you, Timofey. We have a question from a gentleman in the back. Can you introduce yourself?
My name is Andrius Kubilius. I'm more from political community, member of European Parliament from Lithuania. And also I initiated and we created a network of parliamentarians united for Ukraine. And I just came back from Ukraine last evening. So with all my impressions. I think that really it's a great job which you did, really a lot of very, very important information. And sometimes, for us politicians, it looks like that things can be very complicated. I mean, when we are reading, all that economical analysis, sometimes you can lose yourself what to do, But, well, I was at some time Prime Minister of Lithuania. I know that, there are some general things which can help to move forward. And what Mr. Pivovarsky have said, here is an experience how all those problems were resolved, for example, in Central Europe. Of course, the problems were much less. There was no war, but, in some way also, it looked like very complicated, but we moved forward. And why we moved forward? Because there was integration towards EU. So all that complicated situation, which we see now, in Ukraine, how it will be resolved depends not only on Ukraine, but it depends also on EU, very much. And I am much more sure about Ukrainian political will, both to win the war and to reform themselves, than I am, convinced about EU political will to move with integration as it is needed. So not the question, but my wish would be, you wrote the book, Rebuilding Ukraine. I would wish that you should write the book Rebuilding Europe. Now, how to bring back political will, how to convince Europe that this is, historical moment when, the whole Europe can be changed. And it will depend very much on political will on the EU side, really, to both to help Ukraine, with reconstruction, not with 10 people in secretariat, but, I don't know, 4,000 or at least 2,000, okay, we shall not discuss that. But, also with political will to enlarge and to integrate, because that at the end can have major impact also on transformations in Russia. Two major factors, defeat in the war and then, Ukrainian example of Ukrainian success. So I don't know if that's, and in addition to that, I would say that Ukrainian voice now, Ukrainian authority on international community is on such a high level that if you will, design a strategy how to rebuild Europe, that will be, very well received. So please do next step.
Thank you very much. Actually, this is part of one of the questions I was thinking about when reading the book, that indeed you are presenting all these nice solutions and it's kind of a dreamy outcome. No oligarchs, a perfect democracy, etc. But at some point, something needs to give way, right? You want all these massive investments as well. If you want to attract investment, you need to give rents. So maybe you want also to reflect on what are the limits of the exercise and how we can rethink all of Europe together?
Yeah, so in economics, we'll often start with perfect competition, markets clear, and it's not a realistic starting point in many ways, but it gives you a guiding principle, a guiding star. We want to move in that direction. That's the idea. And I think the same is true with our book. It's not necessarily we give you every possible solution. We don't spell out, how you get from point A to point B. But we wanted to give a sense of purpose, like, this is what we want to deliver in the end, and this is our objective. And if you have this principle clearly in mind, then we can find maybe not the perfect solution, but, some approximation to where we want to be.
If I may just add, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the EU candidacy and membership of Ukraine, that's probably one of the unifying topics of this book, in that it's assumed to be happening. And the one thing I would say, coming back from my old economics days at the EBRD as well, when we did research on, we had a transition report, Stuck in Transition, and we basically arrived to the conclusion that not a single country in our countries of operations became wealthy outside the EU. So there's basically no example to follow. So EU integration, it's a prerequisite, it's a critical component for Ukraine's future. And of course, we could write other articles, but let's say based on today's discussions, we have a feeling it's very serious, and European institutions are preparing in good faith to engage in Ukraine's integration. And that's a critical component, that's an assumption. So if that's not serious, then we are in trouble.
I do think it is serious. We have a question here in the front. Can you introduce yourself?
There was a question from Georgetown who didn't get an answer. Is it okay? Yes, didn't get an answer. To settle rules, it's easy. To apply rules is much more difficult. And of course, to attract, on the business side, to attract investors, to attract businessmen, foreign businessmen, to invest or to exchange with Ukraine, confidence and trust are basic. So my question is, does Ukraine plan any campaign, any work to change, boost, support the mindset of people in administration, in institution, in justice? Because you need people to make the laws work. So what do you plan to put people together on a new road?
So there are actually, that's one of the topics that is quite covered in the book, but I don't know who wants to answer here in terms of concrete solutions. Yeah.
I will start, probably colleagues add. First, it's not the new task. It has been happening. Basically, the reform of public administration, the merit-based competition, and how to ensure that you bring and keep bright and ethical people in the public administration is one of the hugest questions that Ukraine has been working on since the Revolution of Dignity. And probably and likely it will continue, because as this is a war, we also lost a lot of bright minds, and including women, because actually the most of refugees are women and children. Also, that should be taken into account. So basically, there is a changes in reimbursement. There is a changes in selection of people in the public administration, and also it is the opportunity. There's a shift into the digital service, so that we need a bit less of people at all levels. That would help also to resolve this deficit of qualified labor force for these positions. And definitely the capacity constraints still are, but as in many cases, as with the whole reconstruction, the whole efforts will face capacity constraints, and that we will have to overcome. Alex was talking a bit about that. So I think that Ukraine has been doing a lot in this area. We have changed the public administration already, and further reforms are like in the process of Ukraine integration are happening. You're not happy, it seems, in this answer.
So we have very little time left. Still one question here. I'm copying the questions online. I don't think we'll have time to address all of them. I don't know if somebody else wants to talk about this very important self-enforcement issue.
You know, there is a little bit of an external component. Ukraine is going to receive a lot of help, but this help is going to be conditional. So unless you start enforcing something, we are not going to give you money. And we already see this is happening. You know, Ukraine, for example, couldn't appoint an anti-corruption prosecutor for a long time. The EU requested this in the summer last year as a part of this, candidacy process, and somehow there was, an appointment, and so this can happen. And this is the beauty of European integration, that in many other countries, in Poland, in Hungary, in Czechia, everywhere you have these challenges, like how can you push through difficult reforms? And when you see a light in the end of the tunnel, it's a lot easier to make sacrifices or overcome vested interests and move forward. So I'm more optimistic about this.
Thank you very much. A last question from Philippe Verwim.
Yes, to push a little bit more in this direction, large influxes of development aid can work as a curse for reform, just as a curse in natural resources prohibits governments to reform, just because the money is keep on flowing in and the need for reform is not considered anymore as an urgency. So how could you build on the current dynamic efforts of Ukrainian society to fight against the Russians? How can you keep that spirit when the country needs to reform? Do you have any idea on how that positive spirit can be continued in the reformation of the administration once so much money is flowing into the country and maybe the need for reform is not considered anymore an urgency because the money will be there anyway?
So Veronika, our time is up, but I think it's also a very important question.
Yeah, just very briefly. First, these money are not guaranteed. They're just promised. And we saw it already in the last year that the money committed and money disbursed is a different amount. Second, the reforms is not something that will start afterwards. They have started quite some time ago. They intensified after 2014, and they are continuing now. And it's important to understand that this promise for EU membership is indeed very transformative and very positive thing for Ukraine. If you look at the level of optimism that the country is going in the right direction, it's incredible. It's up to 80+% of people that think for a year that the country is going in the right direction despite the war. And partially it is because of this European perspective, the clear yes from the EU that yes, Ukraine will be the member. So I think this is important. So it will push reforms, but also it's important for you not to ruin this hope.
So that's both a message of hope and a warning for the future. The online part of the event is ending now. I want to thank everyone. I want to thank the speakers, of course. I want to thank the audience, both online and here on site. Your critical questions and remarks are really very important, fundamental to make the matter move forward. I would like also to thank people who made this event happen. Beatrice Veder-Di Moro, Tessa Ogden, Nadine Clark from CEPR, who are behind this Ukraine initiative. Palina Shaushuk, Claire Gatti, and Grégoire Seger from the Solvay Public Policy House. Frank Vella, Mary Gordon and Julia Murillo from Georgetown University, and the whole Global Economic Challenges Network. Again, thank you very much.